The storm had been raging for 3 days when Abigail Price spotted the swollen river ahead, her heart sinking as she realized her journey west had come to a dangerous impasse. The normally placid creek had transformed into a raging torrent that cut across the trail, swallowing the road she needed to cross to reach Silver Creek, the mining town where her brother awaited her arrival, Colorado Territory, 1876. Spring rains had turned the landscape into a treacherous maze of mud and flooded waterways. Abigail's horse, a sturdy mare named Penny, nervously pawed at the ground as they approached the edge of the rushing water. The stagecoach had refused to continue its route 2 towns back due to the conditions, forcing Abigail to purchase the mare and continue alone, a decision that now seemed foolhardy as thunder rumbled overhead. "Just a bit further, Penny," she murmured, patting the horse's neck. "We'll find another way across." Abigail had left Boston 3 weeks ago, fleeing the unwanted advances of her father's business partner, a man 30 years her senior, who had been promised her hand in marriage without her consent. At 22, she had decided to forge her own path rather than become another man's possession. Her brother Michael, who had struck modest success in the silver mines of Colorado, was her only remaining family and her best hope for a fresh start. The rain began again, fat droplets quickly soaking through her woolen coat, despite the oilskin she'd draped over her shoulders. Abigail guided Penny along the riverbank, searching for any narrowing that might offer safer passage. The late afternoon light was fading fast, and she knew she needed to find shelter soon. After an hour of following the swollen river, her clothes were sodden, and she felt a dangerous chill settling into her bones. Her vision began to blur, exhaustion from days of hard travel finally catching up to her. The fever she'd been fighting since yesterday was winning. Penny whinnied in concern as Abigail swayed in the saddle. "Just a bit more," she whispered, but her strength was failing. The world tilted sideways as she slipped from the saddle, landing with a soft thud on the muddy ground beside the flooded road. Her last conscious thought was of the approaching hoofbeats and a shadow falling over her face. Zeke Garrison had been tracking the spring cattle drive from his ranch to Denver when the storms hit. He'd sent his men ahead with the herd while he circled back to check on a broken fence line near his northern pasture. The detour had put him directly in the path of the worst flooding, and now he was searching for higher ground where he could wait out the deluge. When he spotted the woman's horse standing nervously by the flooded road, his instincts kicked in. 20 years in the West had taught him to be wary of strangers, but the sight of the collapsed figure beside the mare overrode his caution. He dismounted quickly, his boots sinking into mud as he approached the unconscious woman. She was young, with dark hair plastered to her pale face. Her clothes were fashionable but impractical for frontier travel, clearly an Easterner. When he touched her forehead, he cursed under his breath. She was burning with fever. "Madam, can you hear me?" He gently turned her onto her back. No response. Checking for injuries and finding none beyond some bruising, Zeke made a quick decision. His cabin was less than 2 miles away, across difficult terrain but reachable if they hurried. He couldn't leave her here to die of exposure. With practiced movements, he secured her horse's reins to his saddle, then carefully lifted the woman onto his stallion. He mounted behind her, cradling her unconscious form against his chest as he set off toward shelter. The ride was arduous, the rain continuing its relentless assault as Zeke navigated the treacherous path. The woman occasionally stirred but remained unconscious, her breathing shallow. By the time his cabin came into view, a sturdy 2-room structure nestled against a rocky hillside. Darkness had fallen completely. Inside the cabin, Zeke worked efficiently. He laid the woman on his bed and quickly built up the fire in the stone hearth. Years of living alone on the frontier had taught him basic medical skills that had kept him and his ranch hands alive through accidents, fevers, and wounds. She needed to get warm and dry. That was the first priority. Her clothing was soaked through, and the fever wouldn't break if she remained in wet garments. Despite his discomfort with the situation, Zeke knew what needed to be done. With methodical care, he removed her outer garments, keeping her underclothes in place to preserve her modesty as best he could. He wrapped her in thick woolen blankets and set a pot of water to boil for willow bark tea, a remedy his mother had taught him for reducing fever. As the cabin warmed from the crackling fire, Zeke took stock of his unexpected guest. She was clearly educated and well-bred, from her delicate hands to the quality of her now ruined traveling clothes. What was she doing out here alone, miles from the nearest settlement, during the worst spring flooding in a decade? Throughout the night, Zeke tended to her fever, placing cool cloths on her forehead and coaxing sips of willow bark tea between her parched lips whenever she showed signs of consciousness. By morning, her fever had lessened slightly, but she remained caught in the grip of delirium, occasionally murmuring about someone named Michael and something about Boston. It wasn't until the second day that she finally opened her eyes with clarity. Zeke was replacing the cloth on her forehead when her gaze suddenly focused on him. "Who?" she began, then broke into a fit of coughing. "Easy now," he said, helping her sit up slightly to sip from a cup of water. "You've been pretty sick. Found you passed out by the flooded creek 2 days ago." Her eyes widened in alarm as she took in her surroundings and her state of undress beneath the blankets. She clutched the covers tighter around herself. "Your clothes were soaked through," Zeke explained, stepping back to give her space. "I had to get you dry before the fever took you." "Nothing improper happened, madam. You have my word." She studied him warily. At 34, Zeke knew he presented a weathered appearance, sun-darkened skin, a short beard streaked with premature gray, and eyes that had seen too much of the harsh realities of frontier life. But there was nothing threatening in his posture as he moved to pour her more water. "My name is Zeke Garrison," he offered. "This is my ranch, well, my cabin on my ranch." "Abigail," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Abigail Price. I was traveling to Silver Creek to meet my brother." "Silver Creek's another 20 miles northwest," Zeke said. "And with the flooding, you won't be getting there anytime soon. Roads are washed out all through this valley." Abigail attempted to rise but immediately sank back against the pillows, her strength deserting her. "I need to reach Michael." "He's expecting me. He'll worry." "Once the rain stops, I can send word to Silver Creek," Zeke assured her. "But for now, you need rest. That fever nearly took you." As if to emphasize his point, a crack of thunder shook the cabin, and the rain intensified, drumming against the roof with renewed vigor. "How long have I been here?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. 2 days. You were pretty far gone when I found you." She looked down at the blankets wrapped around her. "My things. Your saddlebags are over there," Zeke nodded toward the corner where he'd placed her belongings. "Everything's accounted for, including a rather impressive pearl-handled derringer. Didn't figure you for the armed type." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "A woman traveling alone needs protection." "Fair enough," he replied, "though I'm guessing you've never actually fired it." Her silence confirmed his suspicion, bringing a slight smile to his lips. "Get some more rest, Miss Price. I'll fix something to eat." Abigail watched as he moved about the cabin with the ease of a man accustomed to self-reliance. The space was simple but surprisingly comfortable, a main room with a hearth, table, and chairs. A few bookshelves lined with volumes that suggested an educated mind, and the small bedroom where she now lay. Everything was orderly and clean, not what she had expected from a bachelor's quarters on the frontier. Her gaze followed Zeke as he prepared a simple stew, adding vegetables from a root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the floor. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, his quiet competence. "Are you a rancher, Mr. Garrison?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "Started with 10 acres and 3 scraggly cows 15 years ago," he replied without looking up from his work. "Now I've got 600 acres and a decent herd, not rich by any means, but I get by. You live here alone. My ranch hands have their own quarters closer to the main pastures. I prefer my privacy." He glanced up at her. "This was the closest shelter when I found you." Abigail nodded, understanding the unspoken message. He hadn't brought her to his isolated cabin out of any improper motive, but out of necessity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life. Zeke's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Anyone would have done the same. No, she disagreed. Not everyone would. Her words hung in the air between them as the storm continued its assault on the small cabin. The next 3 days passed in a strange, isolated cocoon as the rain continued unabated. Abigail's strength returned gradually, allowing her to move from the bed to a chair by the fire, wrapped in one of Zeke's flannel shirts, and a spare pair of trousers he'd offered. Both comically large on her frame but warm and dry, Zeke proved to be an unexpectedly considerate host. He kept a respectful distance while ensuring she had everything she needed, prepared simple but nourishing meals, and even produced a worn copy of Dickens' Great Expectations when she mentioned her love of reading. By the 4th day, when she was strong enough to join him at the table for meals, they had fallen into a cautious rhythm of coexistence. They spoke little at first, but as her health improved, Abigail found herself curious about the taciturn rancher. "How did you come to Colorado?" she asked over breakfast on the 4th day as sunlight finally began to peek through the clouds outside. Zeke considered the question as he sipped his coffee. "War ended. Didn't want to go back to Tennessee. Too many ghosts. You fought for the Confederacy?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. A shadow crossed his face. "Fought for Tennessee, never owned slaves, never believed in the cause, but when your home's being invaded," he shrugged. "Doesn't matter now, war's been over 12 years, I came west to start fresh." "That's why I came too," Abigail admitted, "to start fresh." Something in her tone made Zeke look up from his coffee, studying her with those perceptive gray eyes. Running from something, Abigail hesitated, then nodded slightly. "My father died last winter. His business partner arranged with him to marry me before he passed. I had no say in the matter." "And you refused." "I left in the night," she confirmed. "My brother Michael struck silver 2 years ago, not a fortune, but enough. He's been asking me to join him since our father's health began to fail." Zeke nodded slowly. "Bold move, traveling alone. Foolish, perhaps," Abigail admitted with a rueful smile, "as my current situation demonstrates." "Brave," Zeke countered. "There's a difference." The unexpected compliment brought warmth to her cheeks, and she looked away, suddenly conscious of their strange intimacy, sharing meals in his cabin, wearing his clothes, sleeping in his bed while he took the floor by the hearth. "The rain's stopping," he observed, nodding toward the window. "Another day or two and the creek might be passable. I can take you to Silver Creek then." Abigail felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "No imposition," he said simply. "Been a while since I had company that wasn't looking to sell me something or collect a debt." She laughed at that, and the sound seemed to surprise both of them, a bright, clear note in the rustic cabin. Zeke's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Abigail glimpsed the younger man beneath the weathered exterior. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked impulsively. He considered the question with the same deliberate thoughtfulness he seemed to apply to everything. "Used to people asking if I get scared, living so far from town." "I suspect you're not the type to scare easily, Mr. Garrison." "Zeke," he corrected. "And to answer your question, yes, sometimes, but I've found loneliness to be better company than most people." "That's a rather bleak outlook," Abigail observed, "just honest. The West has a way of stripping away pretenses." He stood, collecting their empty plates. "Speaking of honesty, your fever's gone, but you're still weak. Don't push yourself too hard today." The concern in his voice was masked by practicality, but Abigail recognized it nonetheless. She watched as he moved about the cabin, tending to morning chores with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything he did. Later that day, when the rain finally ceased completely, Zeke opened the cabin door to assess the damage. Sunlight streamed in, along with fresh air that carried the scent of wet earth and pine. "Want to stretch your legs?" he asked, glancing back at Abigail. "Might do you good to get some sun." She nodded eagerly, tired of confinement despite her lingering weakness. He helped her to her feet, his hand strong and steady under her elbow, then quickly released her once she found her balance. Outside, the world glistened with raindrops. The cabin stood on a gentle rise, providing a view of the surrounding landscape, rolling hills covered in pine and aspen, a meadow below where wildflowers were already beginning to peek through the wet grass, and in the distance, the snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed, the vista far grander than anything she had imagined during her days in the cabin. "Worth fighting for," Zeke said quietly. "This piece of land," she glanced at him, struck by the pride in his voice. "You've built something remarkable here." "Still building," he corrected. "Always will be." They walked slowly around the cabin, Zeke pointing out features of his land, the creek that ran along the eastern boundary, the stand of aspens where moose often sheltered during storms, the distant outline of the main ranch buildings where his handful of employees lived and worked. By the time they circled back to the front of the cabin, Abigail was tiring, but the fresh air had brought color to her cheeks and clarity to her thoughts. She paused, looking up at the man who had saved her life. "I never properly thanked you," she said. "No need." "There is," she insisted. "I would have died out there." Zeke met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "When I found you, you were barely breathing, skin cold as ice despite the fever. Brought you here, got you warm by the fire. When you finally stopped shivering, I remember thinking, she's warm now, it's over. The worst of it, I mean." He looked away, uncomfortable with the admission. Abigail was struck by the image, this stoic man caring for a stranger through the night, worried she might not survive. "Well, I'm grateful, regardless of whether you want my thanks or not." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn, aren't you? My brother would say so. Smart man, your brother." Zeke gestured toward the cabin. "Come on, sun's getting low, and the evening chill won't do you any favors." That night, as they shared a supper of venison stew, the conversation flowed more easily. Abigail told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's shipping business, about the books she loved and the music she missed. Zeke spoke little of his past, but shared stories of ranch life, the cattle drive, where his cook had accidentally used coffee beans instead of beans in the stew, the time a mountain lion had taken up residence in his barn, the spring when wildflowers had carpeted his entire north pasture in blue and gold. "Do you ever regret coming west?" she asked as they finished their meal. Zeke considered the question, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "No, hard as it's been sometimes, no." "What's the hardest part?" "Winters," he said without hesitation. "Not the cold or the snow, the silence. Days when the only voice you hear is your own starts to wear on a man." Abigail nodded, understanding better now his earlier comment about loneliness. "And the best part?" At this, he stood and moved to the door, opening it wide. "Come see." Curious, she followed him outside. The storm clouds had cleared completely, revealing a night sky ablaze with stars, more stars than she had ever imagined possible, stretching from horizon to horizon in a glittering tapestry. "Oh my," she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. Without thinking, she reached out and caught his arm for balance as she tilted her head back to take in the magnificent display. "Can't see this in Boston," Zeke said softly. "No," she agreed. "You certainly cannot." They stood side by side in comfortable silence, gazing upward. Abigail became acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid, steady, unexpectedly comforting. When she shivered slightly in the cool night air, Zeke instinctively moved closer, providing warmth without touching her. "We should go in," he said after a few minutes. "You're still recovering." But Abigail lingered a moment longer, reluctant to leave the beauty of the night sky and the strange peace she felt standing beside this quiet, thoughtful man who had saved her life. Something was shifting between them, something she wasn't ready to name, but could feel as surely as the solid ground beneath her feet. When they finally returned inside, the cabin seemed smaller somehow, more intimate. Zeke added wood to the fire, and Abigail settled in the chair nearby, watching the flames dance. Neither spoke for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. "Another day or two," Zeke finally said, "and I can get you to Silver Creek." Abigail nodded, feeling a curious reluctance at the thought. "Yes, I suppose the water will have receded by then. Your brother must be worried." "Yes." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Though he knows I was traveling with the spring stagecoaches, they're often delayed by weather." Zeke studied her for a moment. If you'd like, I could ride to the telegraph office in Clearwater tomorrow. It's only 6 miles south. The lines might be working. You could send word that you're safe. The consideration touched her. Would you? I'd be grateful. First thing in the morning, he promised. I'll write a message tonight. Zeke produced paper and pencil from a drawer, setting them before her on the table. As Abigail composed her note to Michael, informing him of her delay but assuring him of her safety, she was aware of Zeke moving quietly about the cabin, preparing for the night. There was something deeply domestic about the scene, the two of them sharing the warm space as darkness pressed against the windows. When she finished writing, she looked up to find Zeke watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. For a brief moment, neither moved, caught in a silent exchange that stirred something unexpected in Abigail's chest. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. We should get some rest. I'll leave at first light. Of course. She rose from the table, suddenly awkward. I've taken your bed for days now. I can sleep by the fire tonight. No, he said firmly. You're still recovering. I'm fine where I am. She wanted to protest, but saw the determination in his eyes. Thank you for everything. Zeke merely nodded, that same unreadable expression crossing his features before he turned away. Later, lying in his bed, surrounded by the scent of pine and leather that she now associated with him, Abigail found herself thinking about the strange turn her journey had taken. She had left Boston seeking independence, fleeing one man's control only to find herself dependent on another man's kindness. Yet there was nothing controlling about Zeke's kindness. He offered help without expectation, space without judgment. In the 4 days she had known him, he had shown more respect for her thoughts and feelings than most men of her acquaintance had in years. Sleep came slowly as she listened to the occasional creak of floorboards as Zeke shifted on his bedroll by the dying fire. Tomorrow he would ride to send her message. Soon after, the waters would recede, and he would take her to Silver Creek to begin her new life. Why, then, did the thought fill her with such unexpected melancholy? True to his word, Zeke departed at dawn, taking Abigail's message and promising to return by midday. She spent the morning tidying the cabin as best she could, determined to repay some small portion of his hospitality. She found a worn broom in the lean-to attached to the cabin and swept the wooden floors, then set about organizing the kitchen area, where dried herbs hung from the rafters and mismatched crockery filled rough-hewn shelves. In a trunk at the foot of the bed, she discovered clean linens and remade the bed with fresh sheets, washing the used ones in a basin and hanging them to dry near the hearth. The simple domestic tasks restored her sense of capability after days of weakness. By the time the sun reached its zenith, she had prepared a simple meal from the provisions in Zeke's pantry: cornbread baked in the cast-iron skillet and a pot of beans seasoned with the last of his salt pork. The aromas filled the cabin, creating an atmosphere of homey comfort that pleased her. When she heard hoofbeats approaching, Abigail smoothed her hair and straightened the oversized shirt she still wore, suddenly conscious of her appearance in a way she hadn't been before. She opened the door as Zeke dismounted, and the expression on his face when he saw her standing there, healthy, color in her cheeks, a tentative smile on her lips, made her heart skip oddly. "You look better," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "I feel better." "Strong enough to earn my keep, at least." She stepped aside to let him enter. "I hope you don't mind that I tidied up a bit." Zeke paused inside the doorway, taking in the changes to his cabin, the swept floor, the organized shelves, the meal waiting on the table. Something crossed his face, a flash of emotion quickly controlled. "Didn't have to do all this," he said gruffly. "I wanted to. Were you able to send the message?" He nodded, setting his hat on a peg by the door. "Lines were working. Your brother should get word by tomorrow. Thank you." She gestured toward the table. "Are you hungry?" They ate together, and Abigail noticed that Zeke seemed quieter than usual, almost pensive. When they finished, he thanked her for the meal, then moved to the window, gazing out at the landscape. "Creek's gone down considerably," he reported. "Another day should do it. I can take you to Silver Creek the day after tomorrow." "Oh," Abigail tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "That's good news." Zeke turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. Unless you need more time to recover. Was he offering her an excuse to stay longer? The thought both thrilled and confused her. I wouldn't want to impose further. Not an imposition, he said, echoing his words from days earlier. A silence fell between them, charged with unspoken thoughts. I should check on your mare, Zeke finally said, moving toward the door. I'll come with you, Abigail offered impulsively. I'd like the fresh air. Outside, the afternoon sun had dried much of the muddy ground and the landscape sparkled with renewed life after the cleansing rain. They walked to the small corral beside the cabin where Penny had been staying alongside Zeke's stallion, Thunder. Abigail approached her mare, stroking the animal's velvety nose. Thank you for taking care of her. Good horse, Zeke commented, leaning against the fence. Steady temperament. Saved your life, stopping where she did instead of wandering off. I wasn't thinking clearly when I purchased her, Abigail admitted. I just needed to keep moving west. Sometimes instincts serve better than thinking, he glanced at her. Mine told me to double back to check the north fence line, if I hadn't. He didn't finish the thought, but Abigail understood the implication. If he hadn't followed his instincts, she would have died beside that flooded road. Perhaps it was meant to be, she said softly. Zeke's expression suggested skepticism at such notions of fate, but he didn't contradict her. Instead, he showed her around the rest of his small homestead, the vegetable garden just beginning to sprout behind the cabin, the smokehouse where he cured meat for the winter months, the workshop where he repaired tack and tools. As they walked, Abigail found herself stealing glances at his profile, the strong line of his jaw beneath the short beard, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the western sun, the set of his shoulders that suggested a man accustomed to carrying heavy burdens alone. When they returned to the cabin, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. Zeke paused at the door, looking out over his property with quiet pride. Beautiful, isn't it? Abigail said, following his gaze. Gets in your blood, he agreed. The land, once you've lived out here, nothing else quite compares. I can see why you stay, despite the loneliness. He turned to look at her then, something unguarded in his expression. There are different kinds of loneliness, Miss Price. Sometimes you can be surrounded by people and feel it more keenly than when you're standing alone on a mountainside. The observation struck her with its truth. How many crowded ballrooms and tea parties had she attended in Boston, feeling utterly alone among people who saw only her family name and dowry, never the woman herself. Please call me Abigail, she said softly. After all we've been through, Miss Price seems overly formal. A slight smile touched his lips. Abigail, then. The way he said her name carefully, as if testing the feel of it, sent a strange warmth through her chest. That evening, as shadows lengthened into darkness, they sat before the fire sharing stories. Zeke, usually so reserved, spoke of his life before Colorado, growing up on a small farm in Tennessee, losing his parents to typhoid when he was 16, joining the Confederate Army at 18 more out of desperation than conviction. He told her about the horrors he'd witnessed during the war, the friends he'd lost, the disillusionment that had driven him west afterward. Nothing left for me back there, he explained, staring into the flames. Came west with $20 and my father's pocket watch. Worked cattle drives, mining camps, anywhere that would hire an ex-Confederate with no skills besides shooting straight and riding hard. And now you have all this, Abigail gestured to encompass the cabin and the land beyond. Built it inch by inch, he agreed. Only thing I've ever owned that nobody can take away. It suits you, she observed. This life, he looked at her curiously. Most women from the East find it too harsh, too primitive. I'm not most women, Abigail replied with a slight smile. Boston never quite fit me, though I tried to convince myself otherwise. My father wanted a proper society daughter, but I always preferred my brother's books on natural philosophy to embroidery lessons. What will you do in Silver Creek? Zeke asked. The question gave her pause. She had been so focused on escaping Boston that she had given little thought to what would come after. Help Michael, I suppose. He mentioned needing someone to keep accounts for his mining interests. She hesitated. Though I've been thinking, Silver Creek must need teachers. I had excellent schooling. Perhaps I could be of use that way. Zeke nodded thoughtfully. Town's growing, mostly miners and merchants now, but more families arriving every month. They'd be lucky to have you teaching their children. The simple vote of confidence warmed her more than the fire. Do you think so? I do. His gray eyes met hers with quiet conviction. You've got grit, Abigail, and brains. West needs both. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Abigail found herself reluctant to end the evening. These conversations beside the fire had become precious to her moments of connection, unlike anything she had experienced before. Zeke, she said as he laid out his bedroll near the hearth, may I ask you something personal? He looked up, wariness crossing his features, but he nodded. Have you never thought of marrying, having a family here? The question clearly caught him off guard. He was silent for so long that Abigail began to regret her boldness. Forgive me, she began. That was too forward. No, he interrupted. It's a fair question. He sat on the edge of his bedroll, hands clasped between his knees. I considered it, once. There was a widow in Clearwater about 5 years back. Her husband had been killed in a mining accident. She had 2 young boys. Abigail waited, sensing there was more to the story. I courted her for almost a year, Zeke continued. Asked her to marry me. She said yes initially, then winter came, one of the worst in memory. She and the boys spent 2 weeks here during a blizzard. A rueful smile touched his lips. By spring, she'd decided ranch life was too isolated, too demanding, moved to Denver with her sister instead. I'm sorry, Abigail said softly. He shrugged. She wasn't wrong. This life isn't for everyone, but you love it. I do. He looked around the cabin, the home he had built with his own hands. This is who I am now, don't know how to be anything else. Abigail considered his words, understanding better the solitude that surrounded this complex man. He hadn't chosen loneliness so much as accepted it as the price for the life and land he loved. The right woman wouldn't ask you to be something else, she said quietly. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a current of understanding, of possibility. For a breathless moment, Abigail thought he might say more, might cross the space that separated them. Instead, he nodded once and turned to bank the fire for the night. Get some rest, Abigail. Tomorrow will be your last full day here. Should make the most of it. Sleep came fitfully that night as Abigail's thoughts churned. Tomorrow would be her last day at Zeke's cabin, and then he would take her to Silver Creek to begin her new life. The prospect, which had once filled her with anticipation, now evoked a strange sense of loss. In less than a week, this man and this place had come to mean something to her, something she wasn't ready to relinquish. But what choice did she have? Her brother awaited her in Silver Creek. She had no claim on Zeke Garrison or his quiet life among the aspens. The connection she felt might be nothing more than gratitude on her part, kindness on his. To imagine anything more would be foolish. Yet as she finally drifted toward sleep, Abigail could not silence the voice in her heart that whispered of possibilities as vast and bright as the Colorado night sky. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Abigail rose early, finding Zeke already outside tending to the horses. She watched him through the window for a moment, his strong hands moving with gentle competence as he brushed Thunder's glossy coat, his face relaxed in the morning light. When she stepped outside to join him, he looked up with a smile that transformed his weathered features. Morning, sleep well. Well enough, she replied, unwilling to admit to her restless night. What are your plans for today? Thought I might show you more of the ranch if you're feeling up to riding. The invitation delighted her. I'd love that. After a quick breakfast, they saddled the horses. Zeke helped Abigail mount Penny, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact left a lingering warmth as they set off down the sloping meadow away from the cabin. The day was perfect for riding the storm-washed sky in impossible blue, the spring air fragrant with pine and wildflowers. Zeke led her along winding trails through stands of aspen and pine, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his early days on the ranch. They stopped at a crystal-clear stream to rest the horses, and Abigail marveled at a family of deer drinking on the opposite bank, unafraid of their presence. "Everything feels so alive here," she observed as they continued their ride. "So immediate," Zeke nodded in understanding. "No room for pretense when you're facing nature on its own terms. You adapt or you perish." "Is that what happened to most who came west? They adapted?" "Some did. Others didn't make it. Others went back east, convinced themselves this was all a bad dream." He glanced at her. "What about you, Abigail? Think you could adapt to this life?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. She considered it carefully, looking out over the rolling landscape, beautiful but demanding, generous but unforgiving. "I'd like the chance to find out," she said finally. They rode in silence after that, each lost in thought as they made their way to the highest point on Zeke's property, a rocky outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. Dismounting, they stood side by side, taking in the breathtaking vista. "Your kingdom," Abigail said with a smile, "such as it is." Zeke removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Nothing like what you're used to in Boston." "Thank goodness for that," she replied with feeling. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing past the woman who had fainted by the flooded road to someone else entirely. "You really aren't like most Eastern women who come out here." "I told you I wasn't," she reminded him with a teasing smile. "So you did." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a decision being reached. "Abigail, but whatever he intended to say was cut short by a distant rumble. Both turned to see dark clouds gathering on the western horizon, moving with alarming speed toward them. "Thunderstorm," Zeke said grimly. "Spring weather's unpredictable up here. We need to head back." They mounted quickly and set off at a brisk pace, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. They were still a mile from the cabin when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. "Stay close," Zeke called over the rising wind, guiding Thunder along a narrow trail that cut through a stand of pines. Abigail followed, her heart pounding as lightning split the sky overhead, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. Penny shied nervously, nearly unseating her. "Easy, girl," she murmured, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. The deluge had turned the trail into slick mud, and she could barely see Zeke ahead through the curtain of rain. When lightning struck a tree not 50 yards away, Penny reared in terror. Abigail, caught off guard, lost her grip on the reins and slid sideways from the saddle, landing hard on the muddy ground. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, and for a disorienting moment she couldn't move. Then Zeke was there, dismounting in one fluid motion and kneeling beside her. "Abigail, are you hurt?" She tried to speak but could only gasp for air. Panic flashed in his eyes as he carefully helped her sit up, one arm supporting her back. "Breathe," he instructed, his face inches from hers. "Slow and steady." As her breathing normalized, Abigail became aware of the rain soaking them both, of Zeke's strong arm around her, of his intense gaze fixed on her face. "I'm all right," she managed, just winded. Relief washed over his features. Without a word, he helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying arm around her waist. Penny had stopped several yards away, trembling but no longer bolting. "Can you ride?" Zeke asked, assessing her carefully. Abigail nodded, though her side ached where she had landed. "Yes, we should hurry." Rather than retrieving Penny, Zeke led Abigail to Thunder. "He's steadier in storms. We'll ride double." Before she could protest, he lifted her onto the stallion's back, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he gathered the reins with his free hand. With a quick whistle, he signaled to Penny to follow, and the mare fell in behind them as they continued toward the cabin. The closeness was both shocking and comforting, her back pressed against his chest, his breath warm against her ear as he occasionally murmured reassurance. Despite the raging storm, Abigail felt an unexpected sense of security in his embrace. By the time they reached the cabin, both were soaked to the skin and shivering. Zeke dismounted first, then reached up to lift Abigail down, his hands lingering at her waist as he searched her face. "You're sure you're not hurt, just bruised," she assured him. Nothing serious, he nodded, relief evident in his expression. Get inside, I'll see to the horses. Abigail didn't argue, hurrying into the cabin as another lightning bolt illuminated the darkened sky. Inside, she quickly stoked the banked fire, adding kindling and logs until flames leapt up to chase away the chill. She was still shivering when Zeke entered, rain dripping from his clothes onto the wooden floor. Without a word, he crossed to a trunk near the bed, producing 2 woolen blankets. He handed one to Abigail, then gestured toward the bedroom. You should change into dry clothes. I'll do the same out here. Grateful for his consideration, Abigail retreated to the bedroom, peeling off her sodden garments with difficulty. Her side was already developing a colorful bruise where she had landed, but nothing seemed seriously injured. She dressed quickly in the spare clothes Zeke had provided earlier in her stay, then wrapped the blanket around her shoulders before returning to the main room. Zeke had changed into dry clothes as well, his hair still damp as he stood by the fire. He turned at her approach, concern etching his features. How are you feeling? Better now that I'm dry, she replied, moving closer to the warmth of the hearth. I'm sorry about the riding accident. Not your fault. Spring storms can spook even the steadiest horses. He studied her face. You're pale. Sit down. Abigail complied, settling into the chair by the fire. To her surprise, Zeke knelt before her, looking up with serious eyes. You took a hard fall. Any pain besides bruising? The gentleness in his voice touched her deeply. No, truly, I'm all right. He nodded, apparently satisfied, but remained kneeling before her, his expression troubled. Should never have taken you so far from the cabin with storms possible. Zeke, you couldn't have known, she said softly. Besides, I wouldn't have missed seeing your land for anything. Something flickered in his eyes at her words. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached out to brush a strand of damp hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering against her skin. The touch, so unexpected, sent warmth rushing through her that had nothing to do with the fire. When you fell, he said quietly, when I saw you lying there in the mud, I thought, he broke off, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. I thought I might lose you. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Abigail's heart raced as she held his gaze, scarcely breathing. I'm right here, she whispered. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with infinite care, Zeke leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. When he drew back, his expression was a mixture of wonder and uncertainty, as if he couldn't quite believe his own actions. Abigail, she placed her fingers against his lips, silencing whatever doubt he might express. Then she replaced her fingers with her mouth, returning his kiss with all the emotion that had been building within her since he had found her by that flooded road. The storm raged outside, but within the cabin, a different kind of tempest was breaking, one that had been brewing between them for days. Zeke's arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. This isn't why I brought you here, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Need you to know that. I do know, she assured him, her hands framing his face, just as I know my own heart in this. He searched her eyes, looking for any sign of uncertainty. Finding none, he drew a shaky breath. Tomorrow I meant to take you to Silver Creek. The reminder of her impending departure cast a shadow over the moment. Abigail's hands fell to his shoulders, gripping the rough fabric of his shirt. Yes, what if? Zeke hesitated, then pressed on with characteristic directness. What if I asked you to stay? The question, so simple yet so profound, stole her breath. You're asking me to stay here with you? Yes. No grand declarations, no flowery promises, just that single word laden with meaning. But we barely know each other, she protested weakly, even as her heart leapt at the possibility. I know enough, he replied. Know that you're brave and kind. Know that you see beauty in this hard land. Know that when you smile, something inside me quiets that's been restless for years. He took her hands in his. Rest I'd like to spend my life discovering if you'll let me. Tears pricked Abigail's eyes at the raw honesty of his words. My brother is expecting me. We'll ride to Silver Creek together. You can tell him your plans have changed. A shadow of doubt crossed his face. Unless you don't want, I do want, she interrupted, squeezing his hands. That's what frightens me. How can I be so certain about someone I've known for less than a week? Zeke's expression softened. Maybe some things don't need time. Maybe some things just need the right moment, like when a seed finds the right soil, or a storm breaks after weeks of tension in the air. The poetry of his observation, so unexpected from this taciturn rancher, touched Abigail deeply. She thought of her careful, planned life in Boston, the prescribed path that had never quite fit her spirit, and contrasted it with the wild beauty of this place, the honest strength of this man. "Yes," she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I'll stay." Joy transformed Zeke's weathered features, making him look suddenly younger, unburdened. He drew her to her feet and into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious beyond measure. Outside, the storm began to abate, rain softening to a gentle patter against the roof. Inside, warmth and certainty filled the small cabin as Abigail and Zeke stood embraced before the fire, the beginning of their story unfolding like the Colorado landscape after a cleansing rain, fresh, vibrant, full of promise. The journey to Silver Creek the following day was filled with a strange mixture of nervousness and elation. Abigail rode beside Zeke, stealing glances at his profile as they traveled the now passable roads. How different this journey was from her desperate flight from Boston. Now she rode toward a future of her own choosing, with a man whose quiet strength had captured her heart in the most unexpected way. Michael Price's face registered shock when his sister arrived at his modest home on Silver Creek's Main Street, accompanied by a taciturn rancher she introduced as the man who had saved her life and the man she intended to marry. "Marry," Michael echoed, looking between them in disbelief. "Abby, you've known this man for what, a week, 6 days," she admitted with a small smile. "But sometimes, Michael, life gives you certainty in an instant." Her brother shook his head, clearly struggling to comprehend the situation. He took Zeke's measure with a skeptical eye, noting the weathered appearance, the simple clothing, the quiet watchfulness that suggested a man more comfortable with solitude than society. "Mr. Garrison," he began formally, "while I appreciate you saving my sister's life, surely you understand my concerns about such a hasty decision." Zeke nodded, meeting Michael's gaze directly. "I do. If I had a sister, I'd feel the same, but my intentions toward Abigail are honorable. I've built something solid these past 15 years, 600 acres, a growing herd, no debts. I can provide for her comfortably, if not luxuriously." "It's not about money," Michael protested. "It's about knowing someone's character, their temperament, whether you're suited to one another." "Some things you learn quickly in a crisis," Abigail interjected. "I've seen Zeke's true character, Michael, his kindness, his integrity, his strength." She reached for Zeke's hand, threading her fingers through his. "I know this seems sudden, but I'm certain. More certain than I've ever been about anything." Michael studied their joined hands, then sighed in resignation. "You always were the stubborn one." "I prefer determined," she replied with a smile. After a long moment, Michael extended his hand to Zeke. "If you hurt her, Mr. Garrison, there isn't a place in Colorado territory remote enough to hide." "Understood," Zeke replied, accepting the handshake with solemn respect, "but I won't hurt her. You have my word." They stayed in Silver Creek for 3 days, giving Abigail time to become acquainted with the growing mining town and to help Michael understand her decision. On the 3rd evening, as they prepared to return to the ranch, Michael presented his sister with a package wrapped in brown paper. "A wedding gift," he explained, "though I still think you're rushing headlong into this." Inside was a beautiful quilt their mother had made years ago, preserved carefully through their journey west. Abigail ran her fingers over the familiar pattern, tears welling in her eyes. "She would have liked him," she told her brother softly. Michael's expression softened. "Perhaps she would. He seems a good man for all his rough edges." "The best man," Abigail affirmed. "You'll come to see that in time." The next morning they departed for the ranch, the quilt carefully packed among Abigail's few belongings. As Silver Creek disappeared behind them, she felt a curious sense of rightness, as if her interrupted journey had been leading her not to her brother's home, but to Zeke's ranch all along. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Clearwater, with Michael giving his sister away and Zeke's foreman serving as witness. Abigail wore a simple blue dress ordered hastily from Denver, and Zeke wore the only suit he owned, purchased years ago for business in town. The ceremony was brief. The celebration modest, a dinner at the town's best restaurant with Michael and the handful of ranch hands who worked for Zeke. That night, returning to the cabin as husband and wife, Abigail felt none of the trepidation she had expected. Instead, she experienced a profound sense of homecoming as Zeke carried her over the threshold, his gray eyes warm with love and promise. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrison," he said softly, setting her on her feet inside the cabin that was now truly hers. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. She looked around the simple space that had sheltered her when she was at her weakest, where she had begun to fall in love with this quiet, steadfast man. "It already feels that way." Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Zeke's arms around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Abigail marveled at the journey that had brought her here from a pampered but hollow existence in Boston to this authentic life with a man who saw her truly. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet night. "About fate," she replied. "About how close I came to dying beside that flooded road, how if you hadn't found me when you did." His arms tightened around her. "But I did find you. You found me," she agreed. "And then you said something I'll never forget. You said, 'She's warm now, it's over.'" Zeke was silent for a moment, remembering. "Thought I might lose you that first night. Fever was burning through you, something fierce. When it finally broke toward morning, when your skin felt warm instead of burning hot." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Didn't know then that it wasn't over, that it was just beginning." "Our beginning," Abigail murmured, nestling closer to him. "First of many days," he promised. A lifetime of them. Spring flowed into summer, and Abigail flourished in her new life. The initial adjustments were not without challenges, learning to cook on a temperamental wood stove, mastering the art of preserving food for the winter months, adapting to the isolation that had once driven another woman away from Zeke's life. But where his former fiancée had found only hardship, Abigail discovered joy in the rhythm of ranch life. She planted an expanded vegetable garden, adding herbs and flowers that brought color and fragrance to the cabin's surroundings. She learned to ride with confidence across the vast property, sometimes accompanying Zeke on his daily rounds, other times exploring on her own, developing an intimate knowledge of the land that was now her home. In town, her Eastern education and natural warmth made her quickly respected. When she mentioned her interest in teaching, several families with school-age children approached her about tutoring. By midsummer, she was holding regular lessons 3 days a week in a converted storeroom behind the general store, finding fulfillment in sharing knowledge with eager young minds. Zeke watched her transformation with quiet pride and growing love. The solitary life he had accepted as his lot had been irrevocably changed by her presence, filled now with conversation and laughter, with small touches and shared glances that spoke volumes. In the evenings, they often sat together on the porch he had built at her request, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, planning their future in this place they both loved. As autumn approached, bringing the first hints of coolness to the mountain air, Abigail discovered she was with child. She told Zeke one evening as they stood together by the corral, watching the horses in the fading light. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed with wonder. His hand, calloused from years of ranch work, gently covered her still flat abdomen. "Our child. Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. The smile that transformed his features was answer enough, but he put it into words nonetheless. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He gathered her close, his voice rough with emotion. "When I found you by that flooded road, I was just trying to save a life. Never imagined you'd end up saving mine." Abigail raised her face to his, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "We saved each other." Their kiss was a promise of love that had blossomed against all odds, of a future built together day by day on this wild, beautiful land that had brought them to each other. Winter came early that year. blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside the cabin, expanded now with a new room Zeke had built during the summer months, warmth and contentment prevailed. Abigail, her body rounded with new life, often found Zeke watching her with an expression of amazement, as if he still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. On the coldest night of the year, with snow falling thick outside and the wind howling down from the mountains, their daughter was born a strong, healthy girl with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. They named her Hope, for what had been born between them on a storm-swept road and nurtured into something beautiful and enduring. As dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, Zeke stood by the bedroom window, cradling his newborn daughter while Abigail slept peacefully nearby. Looking out at the ranch that had once been his solitary kingdom, he saw it now transformed not just by the pristine snow that covered everything in white, but by the love that had filled every corner of his existence. "Your mother fainted beside a flooded road," he whispered to the sleeping infant. "And I thought, she's warm now, it's over. But I was wrong, little one, it wasn't over. It was just the beginning of everything that matters." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world renewed much like the love that had begun in crisis, and blossomed into a life neither Abigail nor Zeke could have imagined when fate brought them together on that rain-swept spring day.